Welcome to the as of yet unnamed Star Trek Strange New Worlds podcast. I'm your host, Scott, and I'm here with my longtime friend, Ben.
Hello?
And we are two middle aged Star Trek nerds from a long time ago. I've been watching Star Trek since I was, geez, probably
We're
10.
from a long time ago, like we've come from the past to do a podcast.
There you go. There you go.
Okay.
Should we give a little background? What was the first Star Trek you watched, Ben?
Uh Probably Next Generation. I'd seen original series was on cable and stuff, but I hadn't really watched much of it. Next Generation was the first one I watched religiously.
Right. Yeah, I watched a little bit of the original series with my dad when it was on TV, I mean enough to know what it was, but just a handful of episodes. But I was pretty young when it was on, so I think it was a little bit over my head, but yeah, I'm with you. Definitely Next Generation, cut my teeth on that.
Yep.
Watched a bunch of Deep Space Nine and Voyager, and yeah, so that's kind of where we're at. So, what other Star Treks have you watched, Ben? 'Cause Next Generation's your favorite, right?
Uh, eh, it's a tough call. Like individual episodes of Next Generation are probably my favorite, but overall I think DS9 is my favorite.
Okay, because I think DS9 is my favorite too, just because it's
It's
so
the first one that had
different.
a real arc,
Yeah.
so
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
I mean, Next Generation dipped their toe in that a little bit with some of the Klingon stuff, and Picard getting assimilated by the Borg came back a couple times, but generally it was just a episode of the week thing.
Right. So, do you know? And I did a little research on this. Do you know? So, Strange New Worlds. Do you know what number of Star Trek TV show this is? So, if the
Oh
original
boy.
series was one and Next Generation was two, what's Strange New Worlds?
Okay. I mean, are they counting like the animated series and all of them,
I
or
assume so.
okay? How about eight?
It's 11.
Oh wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Okay,
There are.
they gotta be counting everything to get to 11.
Yeah. Um. There are five Star Trek TV shows on the air right now. It's crazy. Like
Yeah, I know they're milking this this franchise for all it's
they certainly,
worth.
well, I mean, we were in the dark ages for like 10 years when it was in like
Yeah.
development hell, like they couldn't get it on the air, and now they're just like, well, we gotta get as many on the air as we can. So
Well, they weren't allowed to do it for a while.
yeah.
Paramount was keeping all the everything Star Trek had to be the movies with J.J. Abrams for a
Yeah.
while. So
So the impetus of this series actually started with, in fact, all of these or three of these characters. So the Pike character, the Spock character, and the number one character played by Rebecca Romaine were all characters on Discovery. And actually there was such a fan, I want to say uprising, but that's not the right word. There was such a clamoring from the fans because Anson Mount did such a fantastic job as Pike that there was an online campaign to do some sort of spin-off series with Captain Pike, and it actually worked. And so fast forward to May 5th, 2022, the first episode of Strange New Worlds actually launched. So this is ultimately a spin-off of Discovery.
right.
Did you watch any of Discovery that had Pike on it?
No, I saw the first season of Discovery and then bailed.
I'm kind of with you. I watched the first season and a little bit of the second season, and I think maybe a couple episodes here and there, and it just didn't grab me. But I absolutely, the scenes with Pike were amazing because I don't know what it is about Anson Mount, but he's extremely charismatic and he does a really good job. So I'm glad he got a spin-off
He's
series.
easy on the eyes. I mean,
That's true. I mean, he's absolutely. So do you know anything about Captain Pike?
I mean, yes, I've seen the Menagerie from way back when, and um,
I haven't actually seen it. I mean, I've seen the shots online, and I'm familiar with like his storyline a little bit. Do you want to talk about like what where that comes from? Because ultimately, I mean, here we are, the 11th Star Trek series in, and this is ultimately a reference back to the first one, right?
yeah, I mean, all those those three characters you named, Pike, Spock, and Number One, were all in the original pilot for Star Trek back in what, 66?
Yeah, right. And Uhura was too, but you heard they didn't have Uhura on Discovery, so she didn't quite get the nod. But yeah,
Right.
so
Uh, yeah, and it was, they shot it, and the network, thought it needed some punch up, and so they ended up recasting the captain role with William Shatner, and the rest is history. But
So yeah, you skipped a step there. Pike was the original captain in the original pilot for the original series,
Right.
and the network didn't like it, so they went back and refilmed it.
Yep. And then
And
they
then
later like cut it up and turned it into an episode.
it was a two-part episode, like you said, the Menagerie, right?
Yeah.
Season 1, episodes 11 and 12 of the original series. Do you know why they did the Menagerie? I thought this was interesting.
No.
So apparently the original series is on TV and it's got a lot of special effects, and it was an expensive show to produce, and it took a long time for the effects, because they're in the 60s, and they couldn't get the new episodes to the studio in time. So the studio was putting pressure on them, like, look, we got to put this on the air. Like, you can't keep holding up these episodes for these effects. So what Roddenberry did was he went back to the original unaired pilot at the time, which is called The Cage,
Yes.
and they used all the stuff of Pike from that, and ended up making a two-part episode about it. So it was really just kind of it was a budget thing, really, which I thought was kind of interesting. So
Huh.
what do we? So before we haven't even got to the beginning of this episode yet. So what do we know about Pike before this show even starts?
Well, I mean that's all I know about Pike before watching Strange New Worlds is what I know from watching the Menagerie, where he's a captain of the Enterprise for quite a while. They have something happens to him. They don't really quite know what it is, and then as they go and investigate, they find that he's basically a space vegetable in his little Pike sled, and yeah, I'm trying to remember exactly what happens. Like the aliens have their like mind control powers and make a like they make a world for him where he's whole again. Is that kind of what it is?
No, I don't know the specifics of that episode. Maybe I should have watched it in preparation for this, but I do know, like you said, that it essentially ends and you see Pike in a wheelchair or a hover chair or whatever, and he's horribly burned, right? His
Yeah.
face is, and he can't really speak, and he has, I think it's three lights above his head, and he sort of
It's
communicates.
just beep. It's one beep for yes, two beeps for no. Like that's
What?
all he can do.
So there's like a Stephen Hawking thing kind of going on there, where so
Yeah.
he's this guy, and he's sort of still there, but he's horribly disfigured. So that going into this, that's all I really knew, is that Pike was, the original captain of the Enterprise. That's canon, and something happens to him, and he gets burned and end up in a wheelchair. And that's really essentially, at the start of Strange New Worlds, I think that's all you really know about him. But that is important to know before you go into this.
Yeah.
You could start the show without that information, but if you do have that information of where he ends up, then it adds a little bit to this.
Right, and they allude to that pretty quickly in episode 1 of Strange New Worlds. We get quite a few flashes to his future.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I think it kind of goes without saying, but I'm going to say it just so that it's clear. This is a prequel to the original series. This is before Kirk is on the Enterprise, or is captain of the Enterprise. This show takes place 10 years before the original series. So
Right.
there's a decade between this and when Kirk takes over. So sometime between the start of this show and the start of the original series, something happens to Pike. So I think that's sort of what they're setting up, is that, hey, there's going to be a story arc for this character.
Right. And it seems like we're supposed to know a little bit more about Pike from Discovery,
Yeah,
although it
so
sounds like you and I are both kind of in the dark on that.
we will. Yeah, I took some notes on that a little bit, and we can. I'm trying to see if it's worth talking about right now. We can talk about it real quickly. Okay, so just like Deep Space Nine opens with the Battle of Wolf 35, is it 359? Yeah,
Three
Wolf
five.
359.
Yeah,
And there's the big
yeah. It's yes it
the big
is.
Borg
Good point.
fight, and essentially Cisco is ticked off at Picard because he got his wife killed. So there's this big tie-in between the universes. So
Right.
that's what ultimately happens here, is in Discovery, the when Pike, well, I don't know how, I don't know all the details, but the Discovery goes into the future. There's some sort of time warp thing, and they create a wormhole, which causes problems and essentially leads to the beginning of this show.
Okay.
So that's all I'll say for now. We'll get to it once we get to that part of the episode, because they actually reference it in the episode. So the only other thing, because I don't even know how far we are into this, we haven't even started talking about the episode yet. We're 12 minutes in. So the only other thing I want to talk about before we start the episode is if you're not aware, we need to talk about what the Prime Directive is. But more specifically in this, because this is before the original series takes place, they refer to it in this episode as Starfleet General Order 1. Do you want to talk about what the Prime Directive is and what it means?
Yeah, I mean it's been around since the original series, and it's Starfleet's biggest, regulation, which is that they're not to interfere with the development of any species. So anyone that doesn't already have warp travel, they're not supposed to reveal themselves or their technology so that they don't influence those cultures and cause them to go, you know, down a different path than they would have on their own. Because it's, at least every example we have of that happening, it ends up going really badly. So
And
they
ultimately,
seem justified in
yeah,
having the Prime Directive, although it also seems like it gets broken an awful lot
yeah, it does.
for
And it
for a rule
absolutely
that's supposed to never be broken under
yeah.
any circumstances. It gets broken an awful lot with seemingly no consequences. So
This entire episode revolves around them violating the Prime Directive, so it's interesting. But I think that was a perfect definition. So basically, Starfleet is not allowed to interfere with uh, a civilization that does not have warp technology.
right.
And we can go into the hows and whys a little bit later in this episode, but I think you got it. So that's everything I wanted to cover just to set the basis. Anything you can think of before we dive into the actual episode?
No, let's do it.
All right, so I kind of like to go scene by scene, at least hitting the big scenes. So the episode opens with there's an alien race, and they're looking up in the sky, and they see a U.S. Federation ship. You see a ship that looks sort of like the Enterprise. You don't know who the race is. It's not a race that we've seen before, and they're kind of looking on their scanners, and they're looking up in the sky, and they see a ship, and that's pretty much the first scene, and that's all you see. So there's not a
Now I
whole lot
have
of
to say,
explanation here.
right, but I have to say they pulled off the fake out pretty well with this because we're clearly meant to think as they're going through that scene that we're watching a Starfleet crew about to make first contact, and then we realize no, this is the other side about to be have first contact made with them
Oh, okay.
because
So,
they're having you're hearing number one's narration of the process of first contact and watching this person walk down
oh,
the hall and get into like the ops room and everything, and pretty clearly you're supposed to think that this is okay, we're ready to make first the Federation's ready to make first contact with another species, and then it turns out that no, you're seeing the species reacting to what's about to happen.
right. An accidental first contact, which we'll find out later.
Yeah.
So there's not a whole lot in this first episode. So the first scene. So the second scene cuts to Captain Pike's farm. So
By the way, is there a Starfleet captain that doesn't have a ranch in Montana?
that's a good question. That does seem like a very popular thing for them to have is a ranch somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Pike's Farm, it's in Bear Creek, Montana. I don't know if that makes any difference, but I did make note of that. So you see Captain Pike there, and he is looking full on Grizzly Adams with a huge beard and a huge mustache, and he's making
which is
breakfast.
which is totally Hollywood shorthand for anyone going through a mental health crisis.
That's a good. I didn't think about that. That's a really good point.
It's the laziest thing
It
ever. Like
is.
someone's messed up in the head. Oh, they grow a beard. That's what
Yeah.
they do. That's what you do.
Oh wow, I didn't put two and two. You're right. Wow. Is there been? Well, I guess Riker had a beard on Next Generation. Like
I
facial hair
think
is not very
Riker's
common.
yeah, Riker's got to be the only Star Trek character to ever grow a beard where that wasn't a sign of something ominous.
Well, I just remember looking at Captain Pike, going, "Okay, clearly this dude's on vacation because you never see anybody in
Right.
Starfleet with facial hair." Right. Okay.
Spock with the beard is evil. Pike with the
Yep.
beard is,
Having
flaming out. I mean, it's
right.
the beard is not a good sign unless you're Will Riker.
Yeah. Right. Right. So Pike's in the kitchen. He's making breakfast. He's making some eggs, and you see a woman in his bed wake up and come into the kitchen, and he refers to her as Captain Battelle. I don't know if that's important, but she does have a name. And she walks in and she says, "Hey, the phone is ringing again." And it cuts to like his desk or whatever, and you see his tricorder beeping. I thought
Yeah,
it was interesting that she says phone instead of tricorder or communicator or whatever, but she says,
it's a communicator, Scott.
yeah, yeah. So uh, he doesn't answer the phone. He's not interested. And she tries to talk him into, coming back to command to rejoin Starfleet. Because what's implied here, and this is what we talked about a little bit earlier, is that the tie-in with Discovery is there was a very, as part of the time dilation or the time shift in Discovery, which starts off this episode, Pike had a very hard time. He was like tortured in Discovery, and he was not in a good place in Discovery when it ends before we hear.
Yeah,
So
we're
clearly, like
getting the sense he's had a rough go of it lately.
he's
So
he's he's still recovering from whatever happened in Discovery.
right,
And actually, Battelle asks him, and he says he's really reluctant to return to command. He wants to stay on his ranch, and he needs some downtime. And I think at one point she asks him what happened, and he says, "I can't tell you because it's classified."
right,
So this was a big deal, and we'll get to it a little bit later. But he's not interested in ending his vacation. So it cuts to him riding a horse in the snow, and then you see a shuttle land ahead of him in the snow, and Admiral, oh, I didn't get his name,
Admiral April.
April
It
gets off.
is it is Robert April who's the original captain of the Enterprise.
Oh, I didn't know that for real.
Yeah,
Oh, okay. See, I learned something. So shuttle lands. Admiral Robert April gets off and says, "Hey, essentially, you're not answering your phone." And he was like, "Yeah, I know."
yeah,
And he says, "You got to come back. Like, we've got a situation." He was like, "Look, I don't care. I was told I would get 3 weeks of downtime or what, like he's like, I got some stuff I got to work through." And he keeps trying to interrupt him and tell the admiral that he's not interested. And then the admiral says, "Yeah, well, we have a first contact situation." And then he hands him an iPad, and it has a picture of
yeah. It's a picture of
number
the
one
other
on it.
ship. Yeah,
And so at this point, he's emotionally invested because his number one is involved and missing. So
right. I
he,
really I gotta question Starfleet's, uh, you know, gotta question their methods a little bit here. You've got this guy who's like, look, you really do not want me in command of a starship right now. I am not in a good place. And they're like, nope, you're going.
we really need you.
Especially since they're like, no, this mission's super important.
Yeah,
Wouldn't
right.
that be exactly the mission you wouldn't send this guy on right now?
Yeah, that is a good point. That's a good point. Well, it works because Pike decides to end his shore leave. I mean, whatever he
Right.
decides he's going to get involved because now that his number one, his first in command, is involved, he decides to do it. So that ends the first scene. And I thought, and so the next scene is the intro, and it has the Star Trek litany. And I don't think we've heard the litany in any of the recent shows. I don't remember, but it's this is the litany from
Yeah,
the original series, essentially.
right. Yeah, we
But
have not gotten the litany since Next Generation.
really, they didn't do it on. Oh, I guess Enterprise had it. Anyway,
No,
I
Enterprise
do.
didn't have anything over the.
This was part of. I think part of the trailer for Strange New Worlds was Anson Mount reading the litany, and dude, like chef's kiss, like the way he does it. I don't know. I got like the hairs on the back of my neck stood up because he does such a good job for it. And actually, that was when I saw an interview with him online, and he said that was like one of the greatest honors of his life. Was apparently he's a Star Trek fan, but he said recording the litany was like one of the coolest parts of the job. So.
Yeah, I mean, come on, if you're a Star Trek fan, like getting to do that's got to
Oh
be
yeah,
huge.
seriously. Yeah, right. So, I mean, the intro's cool, but nothing really jumps out at me other than it's cool to hear the litany again.
Yeah,
So,
it's been long enough that one of the reasons it seems like this show is going to succeed is that the nostalgia strings they're tugging on, they've tightened enough over time that it's working.
yeah, the so after the litany, it cuts to Spock and T'Pring. So they're having kind of a romantic dinner, Has it been,
They're having a courtship event.
yeah, they are. Has it been mentioned what that Spock's wife was named? It must have been
Yes, that's in the
the
original series.
the name to me didn't stand out, but that could just because my memory's on.
She's named in the original
Yeah,
series when Spock has his Pon farr and
yeah,
has to go
right.
back to Vulcan.
I just hadn't heard her name before, but so you see them having a romantic dinner. We'll skip the details. They get engaged. She proposes to him, which was interesting, and she gives him it's a necklace, right?
Yeah.
And so they are engaged. And so they're sitting there having this romantic dinner, and then it cuts afterwards, and Spock's shirt is off, and and all of a sudden, Spock.
Well, if you're not going to have a sexy Spock, then what is the point?
Well, so my note on that was that Spock is cut, dude. Like he's got some abs in this. Like I never looked at Spock before and went, "Oh, that's a good-looking dude." But like
Look,
he's, it was like
forget the Prime
clearly,
Directive. The number one rule of Star Trek is that Spock can get it.
yeah. I was really surprised when they were like that Spock would had he was a good-looking dude under his shirt. So Kirk calls on, whatever, the view screen for wherever Spock is, and he basically tells him what's going on and says, hey, we got a first contact situation. Number one's missing. You got to get back to the Enterprise. And then, oh, well, it starts because when Spock answers, he doesn't have a shirt on. And he says, Spock, do you not have a shirt on?
Yeah.
And what does T'Pring say after that? She said something funky. I forgot to write it down. It was funny though. But he basically catches them,
Yeah,
right.
no, T'Pring's like, yeah, we were in the middle of something here.
Oh yeah,
And
right.
then, because, yeah, either I got to believe that like their communicators just don't have an audio only option.
That's what I was thinking.
Because
It's like
you'd think Spock would have chosen to not have his camera on for that Zoom call if he could.
maybe if you don't have emotions, you don't care.
Maybe,
Maybe you're just like, look,
yeah,
I look this good. Everybody should see it.
or it's just a humble brag.
Yeah, could be. So he talks Spock like, you got to cut your short leave short too. We got to get back to the Enterprise. We got a mission, and T'Pring is clearly not happy about that. But
Well, I
I
mean,
mean,
look, she just she begged Spock, man. I mean, you want to get that on lock. I understand.
yeah, if you got abs like that, you're
Yeah,
going to see that every day. So clearly we're just setting up the characters to get back to the Enterprise so we can get the mission
yeah,
under.
we're getting the band back together.
We're getting the band back together. So the next scene is the interior of the Enterprise. The Enterprise is still in space dock. They were essentially retrofitting, and doing some repairs on the Enterprise. One of the things that they note is that the AI was upgraded. I don't know.
Yes,
I don't know if that comes into play later, but they do mention that the AI was upgraded. So Spock is basically briefing Pike on the crew, on who's on board, because they all got requested to come back quickly, so they're not all on board. Spock does mention that there is a Lieutenant Kirk who I know you requested. He's not on the ship right now, but he will be catching up to them later.
yes, a very subtle reference there.
Yes, so this is not clearly James T. Kirk. This is Lieutenant Kirk. Actually, we'll get into it later.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say we're meant to think it's James T. Kirk.
Oh, you think so? You think?
Oh, for sure.
Oh, interesting. Well, see, I just kind of assumed because this is so far before that I assumed it was his father, not him. But I could see that you could. Yeah, okay, all
It's
right.
only 10 years before.
Yeah, okay. Well, it comes up later because he.
Unlike what apparently J.J. Abrams thinks, you don't go from Starfleet Academy direct to being captain of the Enterprise. There's a few steps in the middle there. So having a young officer Kirk 10 years before he's captain of the Enterprise would certainly make sense.
Okay. Spock mentions that there is a new security officer on the bridge, and her name is, and I'm not going to pronounce this wrong, I'm sure, Laan Noonien Singh. And
Yeah.
I had to look this up, just so that name kind of stood out to me. Does that name stand out to you at
Oh,
all?
yeah. I mean,
What
yes.
what do you know about her?
Well, apparently she's related to Khan.
Yeah, so she's like the great granddaughter or granddaughter. Yes, she's part of the like Star Trek II Wrath of Khan that she's related to him. Um,
That name should ring some bells for anyone who's seen Star Trek property in the last few years.
I didn't. Well, so I remember, and this is why I had to look it up because the name Noonian shows up several times in the Star Trek universe. That must be like the James of the Star
Okay.
Trek universe, because the guy that created Data was named Noonian. I
Oh,
don't remember
that's
his last
true.
name.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
I was thinking she was related to the guy that made Data, but she's not.
Yeah, no,
Noonian
I
is the
think
first name. Yeah.
that was I think that was more of like an homage or something.
Yeah. Right. So we got a new security officer. We have Cadet Uhura, who Pike refers to as the Prodigy. So she's essentially fresh out of Starfleet Academy, right?
Yeah,
But she has some sort of reputation, and she is just going to be temporary on this ship, at least at this point. But you're starting to see the original crew of the Enterprise get put together.
right. And time will tell. I hope they'll find some interesting things to do with her character, as opposed to just you know opening hailing frequencies. That was one of the interesting things that the Enterprise did was with their communications officer having to do some translation in real time and be a linguists expert. So hopefully Uhura has some fun things to do and not just sit there and say hailing frequencies open sir over and over again.
Well, it's worth noting that at this point, as of this recording, that I've watched all of the first season and you're watching it episode by episode, right? So you've only seen the first one.
I've only seen the
Okay.
first one at this point. Yep.
Well, so they do more with Uhura. She has a much better character
I
arc.
assumed that was going to be the case.
So I just Googled it, and according to Wikipedia, the guy that created Data was Dr. Noonien Soong,
Yeah,
and the security officer's name is Noonien Singh. So they're super close together. I don't know what that means. I mean, they don't, as far as I know, they're not related at all. It's just
I
so,
don't think they are. I mean, I think that was just kind of a callback that
yeah.
they did in each generation.
It was
Uh,
enough that it raised my that I had to look it up.
yeah,
So
it'd be an odd. Someone in the Star Trek universe should make a comment on that at some point because it's too odd a coincidence to. Anyway,
so they're on the bridge. Kirk sits down in the captain's chair, and there's a super brief reference where he looks down at essentially the armrest on the captain's chair, and he sees kind of a burned, scarred face in the chair, in the arm of the chair, and it kind of catches him off guard. It's maybe a half second, maybe 1 second long, but it distracts him.
yeah, and we don't really know what he's seeing at this point. Just he's seeing stuff.
Right. He's seeing something. Um, and then, so the last part of this scene is that Kirk tells the crew, he does a ship-wide communication to the entire crew, and he tells them that there was a probe that picked up a warp signature from a remote planet, and the USS Archer went to this planet to investigate because when they see warp signatures from unmapped planets, they go and investigate and they make first contact. And so the USS Archer went to this planet, and they have since lost contact with the USS Archer. So,
But by the way, nice callback to Enterprise there with the USS
yeah,
Archer.
I thought that was cool too. So, it's worth noting that they are now so they have their first mission, and they are en route to investigate what happened to the USS Archer. So after this, we see Pike needs a break, or he needs some time. I assume because he saw the face in the chair, and
Yeah,
he's like,
he's
"Oh,
definitely a little bit rattled and is basically like, "Hey, I'm going to be in my quarters. Call me if something happens." And
yeah."
clearly, the crew thinks that's a little odd. There's some kind of we're all glancing at each other, wondering what's up with the captain when he says, "All right, I'm out."
Well, it would seem kind of, yeah, it was very abrupt. He was like, "All right, engage," like whatever he says, warp two, and then he's like, "All right, I'm immediately going to my quarters." I was like, "Whoa!" Like you can't
Yeah,
like wait, a couple minutes. Anyway, so he ends up in his
but we
quarters.
as the audience know that everything's fine because he doesn't have the beard anymore.
That's true. Oh, that is absolutely. It's absolutely worth noting that once he gets back to the Enterprise, he is clean shaven again.
Right.
So it cuts to Pike's personal quarters, and I made a couple of notes about his personal quarters. Number one, they are huge. Like he has massive personal quarters for one person.
Yeah.
Like I assume on a ship you're going to have limited space, but no, captain's quarters are huge. And he has a fireplace in his quarters.
I
I don't.
noticed that. Yeah.
I was thinking to myself, like, you're on a spaceship, you got limited oxygen, like you probably don't want to be burning it and putting off, toxins
I'm
from the
assuming it's
fire.
not actual having an actual fire in the
Oh,
fireplace.
you think it's like a holograph or something?
Yeah, they could
Okay,
do a holographic flame and even have the heat and everything come off. I mean,
sure.
you know, there's
Okay, that makes
that basically exists now. You can get a little like
that's true. It's just interesting.
fireplace
I mean,
thing
he
that
has.
plugs in as electric heat.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So Spock comes into his quarters and basically mentions that Pike is a different person since he used to know him. He says that Pike is different since he went down to the Klingon moon of Boreth. And he mentions that Boreth has a rare ore that can cause temporal consciousness displacement. So they're kind of setting the stage for this um, part of this breakdown that Pike is having. So
Yeah, I mean, we're getting some details now on like why he's flipping out.
yeah. So Pike mentions to Spock that he, as part of this temporal consciousness displacement, that he has seen his own death, and that it's 10 years in the future. So we now know that Pike is aware of his mortality, and more importantly, that it has there's a clock on it, and he knows when he's going to die, and it's going to be 10 years in the future. So essentially, right at the beginning of the original series.
Right.
And he makes mention to Spock that he's concerned that the knowledge will affect his judgment. He says, "Will it make me cautious?" So he's worried that as a captain, it's going to affect his decision making process. Like, is he not going to be as bold as he might be because
Well,
he
and
knows
he
that his
also
death is
says he's afraid it could make him too bold, that he wouldn't, you know, and he's right to be concerned. I mean, how would that not
absolutely.
affect,
Oh my
you
gosh, can
know,
you imagine? Yeah.
you know you're not gonna, you know you're gonna live for 10 more years. That means, you can do anything at that point because you know you're not gonna die.
Oh, I didn't think about that. Yeah, you're essentially, you're invincible for at least 10 years.
Right.
Huh, okay. So the scene ends um, with Pike looking down at this whiskey bottle that they were sharing and they were drinking, and he has another flash. And at this point, you see him flash forward, and you see himself burned and in the wheelchair that we know he ends up in as part of
Right.
the original series. So Pike is having a rough time, and he's trying to figure out what he's going to do with this new information and how that's going to affect him as a captain. Do we know? So the next scene is that the Enterprise gets to the planet where the USS Archer was, and I didn't even write down the name of the planet. I should have. But they get to the planet and they see the USS Archer in orbit, and they do some scans on the USS Archer, and it's completely empty. There's no bodies, there's no life signs, there's no nothing. So the crew is completely gone, but they're not dead because they're not on the ship.
Right. And I think they make mention of the fact that the crew was pretty small, right?
Yeah, because they only ultimately end up
I think they're talking about like
recovering.
4 people.
You say four?
I think so.
Yeah, because I think they recover three from the. Yeah. Anyway, yes, you're absolutely right. There was not a large um, crew on this ship, so um, they scan the planet and they look at the planet, and what they come up with is that this is a very primitive planet, and they come to the conclusion that if there's a warp signature on this planet, but this level of civilization should not have warp technology. They are way too primitive. Their technology isn't up to snuff.
Right. They don't have, the other technologies that would go along with the level of technology that would let them have warp drive.
Right. So they kind of determine that something's up, and they decide to put up shields. So they raise the shields, and right about then, 3 or 4 plasma torpedoes get fired and actually hit the Enterprise, and it does no damage essentially. And one of the crew makes mention that that's 21st century tech. So they're just setting the stage again that whatever's going on in this planet, they're basically where we are right now is in the
Right.
21st century. They don't have any fancy warp drive or fancy tech to support this. So they do a little more scanning and they determine that it's not a warp drive that they are detecting; it's a warp bomb.
Right.
So what they normally expect to see when they see warp signatures is using it in a warp drive, but that is not the case this time. And I think actually doesn't Spock mention that in all the cases of civilizations developing warp, that a warp drive is always developed before the bomb. So this is very out of the ordinary.
Yeah, they always he says that whenever they see warp technology, it's in the past it's always been used for propulsion.
So at this point, we don't know a whole lot other than that. They do mention that they scan the planet and they see that there are two factions on the planet and that those factions are actively warring with each other. So we've got an empty USS Archer, we've got a warp bomb in play, and we have two factions that are actively engaged in war with each other.
Yeah.
So they decide that they need to beam down. They need to do a rescue mission. Oh, they also determine that the crew from the Archer is on the planet. So they're going to go down and try and rescue their crew.
Right.
But they can't just go down to the planet because the aliens on this planet have a very distinct look. So they have to go to sick bay, and they basically get disguises.
Yeah, and they also determine at this point that since they don't have warp drive, that their General Order 1 is in place, and so they can't reveal themselves. They
Absolutely,
have
yes.
to, they have to try to blend in and not give themselves away.
Right, absolutely. I missed that. So we're back to the Prime Directive, which at this point is called Starfleet General Order 1. It has not been named because we're too early in the series. So they have to go down incognito to the planet um, surface,
Right.
and so they need disguises. So they go to the sick bay, and Nurse Chapel is there, and Nurse Chapel is a character from the original series also. So we're introduced to, I think this is our fifth character from the original series.
Hmm.
So we're just again we're putting more of the band back together, and we're starting to see where some of this comes from. Nurse Chapel gives them all disguises. She has extensive experience in biomodification, and she gives them all an injection which makes their physical appearance look like the natives of this planet.
Right.
And I don't know. I think this is a little bit of setup, but I did note that La'an does not take the sedative. She was like, I want, oh, because the process is extremely painful. So they give them a
Right.
sedative and then this thing that biologically modifies them. And La'an refuses the sedative. And I think it's just worth noting that she's kind of a badass. I think that's what they're setting up with this character. Did you think?
Sure, but there's also, I mean, there's got to be more to it, which, yeah, and again, I haven't seen any episodes besides the first one, so I don't know, what is going to explain this, but there's clearly something here, she's got some kind of tenet or belief system that, you know, tells her she can't take this sedative, because, it doesn't play to me like she's just trying to be a badass. She's not doing this for funsies. It's like, hey, I'm going to go on the mission and do my duty, but I can't take the sedative as part of that. And then, she's not enjoying it. So,
Yes. I'm trying not to give too much away because I've seen where this
yeah,
goes. I'm more interested in hearing your side of it because
yeah. I mean, clearly, there's some kind of she's taken some kind of oath, or she has, some code or belief system that means she can't take the sedative for whatever reason. So I don't know what that is, but I assume that's something we'll find out as the season progresses.
so well, who's on the away mission? We got Pike and Spock and La'an, right? There's
Yeah.
three of them, and so they beam down to the planet,
So
and they're
real quick though, before we get to that, this is like the first part of the episode where I'm like, okay, this just doesn't make any sense. We've done the establishing shot on the bridge at this point, so we're aware that the crew of the Enterprise consists of more than three people.
right.
So you've got the person who can't take the sedative that stops this from being a horrifically painful process. Okay, we're going to have her be one of the three that goes.
Right.
Can't do it without her.
Okay.
And then we've got Spock, who this wasn't a surprise to them. We find out right there before they even do this that the process is not going to work terribly well on him because he's a Vulcan.
Yes, his physiology is different, so he has
Right,
a shorter time clock before it
right.
reverts. Yep.
But yeah, taking Spock,
Sure.
got to have him.
Sure. Absolutely.
And then we've got Christopher Pike, who's like he's good to go. But I feel like they could have probably found a second person to go who would not have been subjected to horrific pain in the process.
Okay.
And I also feel like they could have found a third person to go who wasn't going to endanger the entire mission by having the process reverse at exactly the wrong time.
I think those are fantastic points,
And
and
I
I
mean,
have no argument.
I'm going back to Pike is just not himself right now. I mean, that seems like a good leader would have been all over that. Leadership is nothing but putting your resources in the right place at the right time. So
I think those, I think those are all fantastic points, and
yeah,
I mean,
definitely questioning Christopher Pike's leadership skills at this point. So
unfortunately, I think a lot of those decisions are driven by they need to make a good TV, and so
right. I mean, obviously, when we're establishing that this process might not work for Spock, and might reverse. We know what's coming.
let's get into that because that's essentially what happens, and I think that's probably part of it. So we see Pike, La'an, and Spock land on the middle of this planet. Uh, they do some scans and they determine that number one is deep under the surface of the planet. So they start, heading towards where she is. They got the tricorders out. They're kind of zeroing in on her signature, and they had to do like a retinal scan to get into, I don't know, the prison or wherever they were.
Yeah, I mean, it's unclear what this. I mean, it's the central government building or something like that, but it's some kind of hospital slash research lab that has the warp signature as well as the life forms they've detected their human compatriots who are missing.
So, and this is, I thought this was kind of a silly scene, but essentially they La'an and Pike get through the retinal scan, and just as they're about as Spock is about to go through, like lo and behold, what happens? Like his bio stuff starts reversing because his physiology doesn't work, right? So they have to come up with this like booster shot, essentially, like they have to give it to Spock so that he'll pass this bio scan, and they literally beam it directly into his eye
Yes.
and like I mean, I thought the scene with like the transporter tech was pretty good. They asked him, "Can you do this?" And he was like, "What? No, that's not how transporters work." And like the acting captain is like, "Well, you better find a way to make it work."
Right. In true Star Trek fashion, we're told that this is impossible, and then 30 seconds later, they make it work.
Yep. So, and of course it works. Spock scans through the thing, and they get basically into this, you know, central tower or whatever. They, take an elevator down. They get down deep where they're finding number one's comm signal.
Yeah.
And were
But
they were they supposed to be in jail or being held?
yeah, they're held in some kind of confinement area way down deep. But again, I'm questioning. Now I'm questioning the security practices or whatever this race is that we're visiting because they need the retina scan to even get in the building. But then once you're in the building, you're in the building, man. You can go wherever you want.
Well, that's what I put. I'm like,
You want to go down to the holding area?
yeah.
No problem.
So that was my note. Was I mean, so this is essentially a prison break. They're going to break out, but yeah, they get in the elevator. They go down. There's no guards. They basically open the door. They're like, "All right, come with us."
Yeah.
There was like some weird comment where she's like, "Oh, we used a spoon and we opened up the wall. We think we can get a comm signal out, but that doesn't go anywhere."
Yeah.
They
I mean,
literally just walk in and walk out with their crew, right?
right. I mean, I think this is we're running up against the time. The episode only has an hour of TV here, and
Yeah.
they needed to cut some corners. So yeah, it's very, very easy for them to get these prisoners out once they get into the building. So
I mean, I understand it's 21st century tech, like sure, but like they literally didn't even have a guard. So they get
no,
the,
we
they get
blew our suspense scene on them getting into the building with
yeah.
the retinal scan, and now it's all going to be real easy because we got to jump forward here. So
So they're actually they even walk out. So they get their three people. So they got the three original members of the away team, and then the three people they rescue, and they walk out. As they're getting on the elevator, like some guards or some other people like get off the elevator, and like, oh, I'm like, oh, here's the tension, right? There's going to be a little bit of a fight. It's like 4 seconds, man. They just crush them, right?
well, they don't
And
even. I mean, the only reason they even have to fight them is because that at that point now, finally the Chekhov's gun, not that Chekhov, the other Chekhov's gun,
uh,
goes off, and Spock's his biomodification
oh,
ceases
right.
completely, and then the people they had run into who didn't think it was weird that these guys were just moving around with these human prisoners
Yeah.
suddenly now realize that, oh wait, something strange is going on here, and then they have to fight off the guards.
And man, what a fight it is.
Yep.
I think it's all of 2 or 3 seconds. Anyway, they completely overpower them. So we are at this point back on the elevator, and all six of them now are getting back to the surface so they can beam them out. So there's a
I
little
mean,
bit of
at this point, maybe, Starfleet puts a small amount of steroids in every meal you get from the replicator or something.
yeah, it could be. So there's a little bit of exposition in the elevator ride back to the surface, and Pike asks number one what happened, how did you get here, like what's going on, and she says I can't tell you, like all of that is classified. I can't tell you in front of La'an. and and Pike basically says, I don't care, like, just tell me what the heck happened, like you can talk in front of her. And what number one says is, we're less than 1 year from 0 point. And this is where you start to understand how this is connected to Discovery. So in Star Trek Discovery, they opened up a wormhole to the future because the first two seasons of Discovery take place in the past,
Right.
um, and the at least the third and the fourth season, which are current as of right now, take place far in the future. So there was a wormhole opened up that to mess around, so they could just to give them an excuse to go to the future. Well, when they did that, there were there was an event, and again, I haven't watched Discovery, but they make mention in this that I think there were Klingon ships and there were also Federation ships. What she says was that there were 100 warp signs in the sky as part of this wormhole opening up.
Right.
And she mentions that where this wormhole was opened up and where all these warp signatures were seen was less than 1 light year from this planet that they're on. So the natives on this planet, you just used their generic old 21st century technology telescopes, saw this wormhole, saw all these warp signatures, and basically figured out from that how to reverse engineer a warp, I guess,
Right. They
bomb,
real
right?
yeah, they got the warp signature and figured out how to replicate that kind of energy.
But again, rather than replicating it in a drive, to do something productive, they made a bomb. So this is Prime Directive 101, right? This is why
Right.
you don't interfere with pre-warp civilizations, because they just don't have the capacity to understand this technology without using it for nefarious purposes.
Right.
So there's a quick flash where Pike looks at the elevator, the shiny part of the elevator. You see another burned face in the elevator wall. So this is, I think, now the third one in the episode. So Pike is seriously having flashbacks at this point. Um, they, I can't remember if it's on the elevator or off, but they get to the top. So they're now within communications and transporter range of the Enterprise, and they're all about to beam up and just get the heck out of Dodge. And Pike says, "Hey, we can't leave because this planet, you have these two warring factions. One of them's got a warp bomb now. Like all of these deaths are going to be on our hands if we leave." So he convinces Spock to stay with him, and so Pike and Spock decide to stay on the planet and basically convince them not to use the bomb. So the other
Yeah.
four beam back up.
Now,
And
one question I had that I guess it's just, a bit of a plot hole that the episode didn't have time to cover, but Did we ever? What was your sense for how did number one and the crew end up on the planet?
They well, I
They find the ship in orbit, and the ship's fine, but they're not there. So is the implication that they went down to the planet to like say, "Hey, here's our, here we are. It's time for first contact," and they got jumped?
Oh, I got the impression that, and none of this is said, so we don't know for sure, but I got the impression they were trying to do a stealth mission and they were going to try and recover this warp technology and prevent them from using it.
Okay.
But I don't have any, and there's nothing in the
Yeah,
episode
they
that
didn't
says
they
that.
didn't really
It could,
explain like how they ended up
yeah,
on the planet.
it could be either one. But the point is that the
Yeah,
USS Archer went to investigate. They beamed down to the planet to do something. Whatever happened went awry and they got captured.
right.
So at this point, it's Pike and Spock on the elevator, and Spock looks like a Vulcan now because his physiology is reverted, and the doors open, and there's a bunch of natives, and they have guns pointed at Pike and Spock, and Pike looks at all of them, and he says, "Take me to your leader," which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, no, that was, I mean, yeah, it's cliche, but it's a good line.
Yeah, I thought so.
It worked. It
So
played. It played.
he basically goes to, they take him to Congress or whatever the leadership
Yeah,
of
they're
the
taking him to
planet.
the, Madam President.
And he explains like, "Hey, look, you're right. You got this technology and it's bad news. It's going to be a problem because this you're not ready for this." And he tries to convince them like, "Hey, you really don't want to do this. You don't want to blow up these people. It's going to be a lot of death and it's just not a good situation, right?" And the lady leader, the female leader says, essentially, whoever has the biggest stick wins. And she's like, "I've got a pretty big stick right now. I have this warp bomb." She was like, "This is going to put my faction on, on the right side of history, right? Or,
Right.
at least give us a leg up." And so they're, and that's kind of the end. And she like kicks Pike and Spock out. And as they're like essentially being dragged out, he yells to his communicator, which is what across the room, and he's
Yeah.
talking to Enterprise, and he basically tells them to, and I'm not sure exactly what they were doing because the Enterprise doesn't have cloaking, but they were in the atmosphere hiding, and he
So
basically,
they weren't necessarily hiding, but they were, they're in orbit, and I guess the implication is that the general populace doesn't know that they're there.
right?
But clearly, clearly the military knows,
Oh, you think
because
so?
they shot at them. I mean,
Oh, true. Yeah, right,
the
right.
military knows that they're there, but the folks on the street aren't aware of them. But now they are because they've come down into low orbit.
So, yeah, now, so it cuts to a shot of the outside, and you see the Enterprise like in the clouds. Like, so now everyone on the planet knows, like, whoa, there are aliens that exist. Because I think the implication at this point is that this planet is like modern Earth. Like, they don't
Right.
know that aliens exist. They don't know about any of this technology. So all of a sudden, there's this ship in the sky, and they're all freaking out, right?
Right.
So
Yeah,
it's
and Pike basically says something along the lines of like, "Hey, like, we've already broken the Prime Directive. Like, let's just, if we're gonna
yeah.
do it, let's just do it."
That was the note I took. I'm like, now that is a violation of the Prime Directive. Like, wow,
Right.
this is like full on shock and awe, right? He essentially says, like if you think you've got the biggest stick, like let me
Right.
show you what I got up my sleeve, right? So at this point, they now everybody on the planet is aware, hey, they're not alone in the galaxy, and that maybe they need to reevaluate their what's going on. So both factions on this planet then agree to a debate. They're gonna put their differences aside and maybe try and work on this instead of just blowing each other up.
Right.
And they make mention in the episode that this is the first time that those two factions have been in the same room in centuries. So whatever's going on has been a an ongoing feud.
Right.
So the two sides are actively having a debate, and Pike is in the middle, like physically in the middle of them, and he cuts in he cuts them both off, and he gives this speech about what he says was the Second Civil War and the Eugenics War, and finally World War III, and he starts showing essentially video clips of Earth of what happened on Earth before we were refined enough to understand, how to use warp technology without killing ourselves. So he gives this impassioned speech about like, hey, you have this technology, but now's your chance to rise above this and
Yeah,
use it for good. And he offers to let them join the Federation. He says, look, hey, this is Federation of planets out there. We're all working together. Like you guys can come be part of us, or you can stay down here and kill each
yeah.
other.
Now back up for a second too, because there was an interesting thing there where he starts talking about the Second Civil War. Uh, One of the clips in his little PowerPoint presentation was of some protesters marching with some signs about uh, you know something about votes being stolen or elections being rigged or something along those lines.
There was
Um,
actually, and I was going to ask you about this because there was actually a scene. There was it was real quick, but there was also a clip of a gallows, right?
yes.
So, was that directly out of the January 6th stuff, or was that
I
created?
don't know if they showed actual like January 6th footage there, but clearly that's what they're alluding to.
Yeah. So that I did make note that that was interesting that they were
Yeah,
like, yeah,
and I believe that the second Civil War reference is new to the Star Trek canon.
I certainly don't remember hearing anything about that before. They've made mention
Right.
of World War
They
III in
about World
other.
War III, they've talked about the
Yeah.
eugenics war and everything, but
Oh,
the
they have
the
talked about the
whole
eugenics war.
they have, yeah. So
Okay.
that's where Khan came from.
Oh,
So the
interesting. Okay.
eugenics war was Khan, and the eugenics piece is all the bioengineering they
Yeah, yeah,
did.
yeah.
So,
Okay.
Khan and his master race basically trying to take over the world. There were apparently a number of, you know, uh, bioengineered superhumans that all kind of turned into warlords and were fighting each other, and Khan was one of them. So, that's the eugenics war, and then World War III they have where everything gets blown to hell. But yeah, that mention of Second Civil War, I'm pretty sure is new. So we're trying to loop this into some modern day stuff with our allegory here for sure.
So I don't know. We never actually see. That's the end of that scene, the debate scene. I
Yeah,
don't know if we ever actually hear if the sides come to any sort of agreement. But we move on from that, and the planet doesn't blow up. So I guess we can infer that there are ongoing negotiations. So maybe what Pike said, had some effect. I mean, I thought it was a cool speech, and
yeah,
Anson Mount he's a force of nature as an actor. I really like him, so just hearing him say that, I thought it was really cool. So it just really sets up him as a captain and his command, his command ability and his
right,
presence in a room, right? I mean, he was captivating, I should say.
yeah.
So the next scene is the last scene of the episode, and we are now back on the Enterprise in some sort of meeting room, and the Admiral. I'm scrolling up to look again. What was his name? April something.
Admiral April.
Robert April is on the Enterprise now, and they are basically discussing the fiasco that has happened on this planet and the major violation of the
Right.
of
General Order 1.
yes, General Order One. And they basically come up with that there's a loophole essentially in General Order One that because since the Discovery battle never the or what was it the
Basically, he says since they can't because that whole battle that happened with Discovery is classified. They can't acknowledge how these people got the knowledge of the warp signature, so they can't acknowledge any of Pike's violations and deal with them, basically.
so I mean that felt like a very like TV show explanation
It
of like
totally was.
we
Like,
can't throw this guy in the brig, so we got to come up with a way to make it
yeah,
work.
yeah, that was a huge cop out. But yeah, basically it was like, well, since we can't tell people how you broke the Prime Directive, we can't hold you responsible. So you're getting off on a technicality, and we're just gonna like pretend this never happened.
So I mean, it's all good news for Pike because
Sure.
he avoids what court martial and probably prison time and um so uh and that's mostly the end. It cuts to the bridge and Samuel Kirk walks onto the bridge.
Yeah, we get our payoff of the
Yep.
the Kirk reference from the beginning of the episode, and now we find out that it's not James T. It's Samuel Kirk.
And doesn't Pike actually make mention? He asks him like, "How are your kids?" kind of thing.
Something
He
I don't know
makes
about that, but they clearly know each other. Samuel Kirk comes on the bridge, refers to him as Chris, and then catches himself and says, "Oh, sorry, Captain Pike." And so they clearly have
I thought
these
there was
guys
a
are
throwaway
buddies.
line about his kids or something. I just
Maybe something like that. Yeah, but
but the
but
point
yeah,
is that they know each other, and yeah,
they're buddy buddy, and we've got Kirk's dad on the ship.
he is going to he's going to have a job. He's posted to life sciences, so he looks over at Spock and says he's your boss. So Spock
Right.
is now Samuel Kirk's boss.
Yeah, which you would think that would have come up at some point before if Spock had worked very closely with Kirk's dad, but oh well.
Right. That's a little Hollywood hand waving, nothing
Yeah,
to see here because otherwise it
right,
doesn't work. Yeah.
right.
So the acting captain, her name is Ortega, and normally when she's not acting captain, when Pike is um,
On the bridge.
on the bridge, she is um,
Seems like she was the
the
helmsman.
helmsman. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah,
Yes. So she says, "Okay, cool. So now everybody's back on the ship. We survived this. She says, what's the mission?" And Pike recites the litany again. He basically tells the whole crew, like, or at least the bridge anyway. He says, "Hey, we're explorers. We're going to go out and we're going to look around because that's what we do. And so it's in
right.
our nature." And that's it. Star wipe. End of the first episode. The only other thing that is there anything that you had to say on that last scene before I go on just a tiny bit?
Just, I mean, we were dealing with some really heavy stuff that we resolved really quickly.
Right.
And now it's all good and off we go. That's Star Trek, though. I mean,
Yeah.
that's how this always goes. So I can't
This
fault them for that.
right there. I mean, like you said, that's the way Star Trek has to. It's very utopian. Things have to end well. For the most part.
Right.
There was a lot of Hollywood hand wavy, like just trust us that this is
This
gonna
all
not.
works
This
out.
all works out. Um, the only other note that I had on this one is that the credits, so immediately after it ends, even really before you get to the credits are dedicated to April Nocifora. And I'd never heard that name before. Does that ring any bells to you?
No.
I actually had to look it up, but apparently she was a producer who worked on she worked in several different capacities in the Star Trek franchise, spanning over 25 years. She worked on Next Generation and DS9. Anyway, so
Oh
apparently,
wow.
yeah, she had some pretty,
She's
um,
got quite a Star Trek pedigree.
yeah, exactly. So I thought it was cool that they
Well, thank you,
dedicated to
April.
it. Yeah, absolutely. So that was episode one. Uh, I thought it was a good episode. I did not think it was a great episode. What do you think?
No, not a great episode, but it's certainly as far as Star Trek pilots go, it's not bad. Frankly, most of the pilot episodes of Star Trek are not great.
It,
um,
I mean, clearly, I mean, a pilot's episode or a pilot's job is to set up the franchise. We
right.
got set up on a lot of the characters, and I
Yeah,
think
to be
it
fair,
did
it's
its
not a Star
job.
Trek thing. Pilot episodes in
Right,
general usually aren't fantastic. They're still figuring out who these characters are.
right.
In this case, since it's a spinoff, Pike and number one are going to be pretty well established, but everybody else is pretty new. Spock, we all know who Spock is, but we haven't seen this iteration of him. Speaking of which, I thought do you know the name of the actor who plays Spock? I have no idea.
I do. I have it up here. His name is Ethan Peck.
I thought he did great.
Yes.
Not trying to do Nimoy, which is a good move.
hmm
Um, and no, he was good. So
In his defense, I mean, he played Spock on Discovery for at least two or three seasons, so he's got a little bit of
okay,
practice under his belt. And yeah, you're right. He is great at it.
yeah,
Not Yeah, right. It's not a cookie cutter of the original. I think he's got his own take on it, but it is still great.
yeah,
And you see a lot more of both him as an actor and Spock, obviously, in later episodes.
sure. So yeah, I mean, as far as is this a great episode of Star Trek? No, not really. But did it do its job of establishing who these characters are and make me want to see their new adventures coming? Absolutely.
If we weren't doing a podcast about this, would this make you want to watch the second episode?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
You know, I'm invested now. I want to see where these guys go and what
yeah.
strange worlds they discover.
So what the only other thing I thought I kind of want to discuss, and we're sort of dealing with this in the Star Wars universe as well, where you have all these shows, that exist in this universe, and they have to tie back to the original a lot.
Right,
Right. So you got your Star Wars Kenobi show, and it's got Leia and it's got Kenobi in it, and it's got,
right,
all the fan favorites, right? That's what you got here, right? You've got Pike and you've got Uhura and you've got
right.
Spock and Number One, right? So there's a lot of fan service here. Like they're
Yeah,
they're
it's totally a double-edged sword anytime
yep,
you do a prequel like this because yeah, you have the built-in fan service. You've got the characters people know and want to see. So yeah, everybody wants to see Pike. Everybody wants to see Spock, Uhura. All that's great, but then you've got one arm tied behind your back
yep,
because there's certain things you just can't do.
right. That was going to be my question to you: is as a fan, would you rather see a series like this, which is a prequel, in with a lot of the same characters, or would you rather see like a whole new show, like like when Deep Space Nine came out, all of those characters were essentially new. Well, I guess
Yeah,
Rebels still play.
I generally would prefer to see a new show with new
Right,
characters. Or if you're gonna do a prequel, I would prefer it be something like Enterprise, where although it's a prequel, it's all characters where there's no established characters in that show, and so they can really
you're not hemmed in, like right,
yeah, they're hemmed in on the timeline a little bit and the continuity of the show. They can't have the Borg show up and have some huge war with the Borg in Enterprise season 5 that never happened or whatever.
sure,
Although, well, they did manage to work the Borg in there, but they kind of did a cop out where they didn't really know who they were, and anyway, doesn't matter. But they can't do things. They can't introduce stuff that's going to come later. They can't.
kill major characters. They can't.
Yeah,
There's
they can't.
predefined timelines they have to adhere to. Right,
Right. So there's some things they're constrained by, but mostly they can do whatever they want with a whole cast of characters we've never seen before. But with something like this, there's not a lot they can do as far as big changes to what we know the trajectory of these characters is going to be. You mentioned Obi-Wan. Like Obi-Wan had a lot of problems for me just because of all these. They're establishing all these relationships these characters have, where it's like none of this
right,
is paid off by
yeah,
the stuff that comes later now. So
right.
you definitely set some traps for yourself when you do that.
I think you're saying exactly my concerns with this. So when the show was announced, well, number one, I was excited because I really like Anson Mount as a character, and especially as a captain, he's
Yeah,
fantastic. So I was excited to see him, but I think as a general rule, I'm not particularly excited about prequels. Like it's cool to see that story, but like you said, you're so hemmed in with the timelines and the characters and the plot lines that a lot of times as an audience, you don't get that payoff because like I know where this is going to go, right? Like I know
right.
Pike is going to die, I know Kirk is going to come in, I know Spock survives, so at no point can they can't really mess with Spock's character, like he can't be killed in a transporter act, like where
Nothing's
we're
going to
going.
happen. Yeah, he's got the impenetrable plot armor.
Yes. So that said, that again, I've seen the whole first season, and had I known what I know now watching, I would have had a completely different reaction because I was not super duper excited about the show, but now that I've seen it's fantastic. So I don't want to set the bar too high because I may disappoint you, but it does a really good job of playing in the universe without it being
Yeah.
boring or without it being cliche because you know where things going. So
Well, and I'll say this. I mean, the number one things that excites me about it, again, I didn't think this was an amazing episode of Star Trek, but it was an episode of Star Trek. Whereas with Discovery, it does not feel like Star Trek.
I mean,
Um, and
right.
I know there's a whole lot of people out there who are, there's a lot of reasons people don't like Discovery. I'm siding with a lot of, unsavory opinion to there's a lot of people who don't like Discovery because of who the cast is.
And they changed, some of the history of the Klingons, and they certainly changed
Right.
the look of the
But
Klingons.
I'm saying, who's the main character?
Yeah, Michael
Michael.
Burnham.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I don't remember the name of the actor who plays her, but
Oh, yeah,
there's a lot of people who don't like Discovery because there's a black woman as the main character.
yeah, sure.
Um, so yeah, I don't want to don't
I
want to
think
side with those folks.
I I think
This
there
isn't my Star Trek.
right. I think there was. I mean, I'm totally willing to accept that not all Star Trek series are for me, and that's
Right.
fine. A lot of people like Discovery. They like that it went in a new direction and that, they didn't play by all the rules, and that's fine too. So I'm willing to concede that I don't have to like everything and that not everything has to, be cookie cutter and every Star Trek
No,
series has to
and
be the
clearly
same.
Discovery was, was scratching an itch people had. And yeah, look, like I said, there's 5 Star Trek shows on the air right now.
Well, you got to
I mean,
remember that Discovery was I mean, that was the first show after literally 10 years of nothing on the air. So
well,
like,
that's what I'm saying. I mean, after
yeah.
we had nothing, and then Discovery comes along and it spawned all this other stuff. So
Well, I
it's
think
clearly doing something right.
I was really, really excited just to see Star Trek back on the air at all when Discovery came
Right.
on, and then I
I
watched
was too, and then it
it. Man,
turned out it wasn't for
yes,
me.
yeah, but it did not. It hasn't ruined things. Clearly, there's more Star Trek on the air right now than there ever has been in the history of Star Trek. So, hey, if that's what it takes, then by all means.
Right.
So
Speaking of Discovery, man, we need a show about Michelle Yeoh's character from Discovery.
that was the one takeaway was that I think kind of everybody agreed that she was great. Well, I mean, Michelle Yeoh's kind of great in everything she does.
Yeah,
So,
what can't she do? But
but she's fantastic in that. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, so Discovery, I liked some things about it. It got a little out there, and again, I kind of bounced off it after the end of the first season, but it just didn't feel like Star Trek to me, unfortunately.
I'll tell you
But
what, the number one thing I like about watching Star Trek, I mean, clearly Star Trek is the utopian future that I think a lot of people want,
right,
especially in entertainment television. I think a lot of people use it for escapism. I mean, certainly I do, right? And when I
yeah,
would sit down and watch a TV show, like I don't want to watch. I mean, that's one of the reasons I always liked it is because it had always there was always a positive note. Things always ended well, and
it's
there was
got a
always,
there's a formula. There is a Star Trek formula.
and Discovery took that and totally flipped that formula upside down, and it was very dark. I mean, at one point
Right.
they were doing drugs, and they went to like a strip club at one point.
Yeah, it
It,
felt
it,
like they were doing things purely to subvert the formula.
yeah, it felt like they were playing Star Trek, but in a different universe,
Right. And
and maybe
I don't have a problem with that. If you go
yeah,
like, hey, we want to have these characters do XYZ, that's fine, but it felt like the motivation was, okay, how can we show that this is
yeah,
different?
yeah.
Whereas your motivation should come from we have these characters, we want to tell interesting stories with them, not like, hey, we need to find a way to shoehorn in how edgy and new this is. So yeah, it just didn't work for me. But Strange New Worlds, at least after watching the pilot, it definitely feels like it's a Star Trek show.
I, it is indeed a Star Trek show. I agree. I think
Well,
that's
sorry, that sounds like faint praise, but
well. Again, I'm really trying not to. I don't want to build it up too much
right,
because I
right.
really liked the first season, and I also don't want to give away where a lot of this stuff goes because I mean a lot of the things that you said about like a lot of these characters that think here's plot points they can and can't do, here's things that a lot of these characters can and can't do, like a lot of that does come up in this season, and it's really creative how they do it, and they do it in a non-boring way. So anyway, we've been talking for at least an hour now,
Yeah, I was gonna
so
say I think we've gone past the runtime of the actual episode. So
yeah, absolutely. So that was episode 1. Thanks for listening. We'll be back, I don't know, in a week or so with episode 2.
all
All
right,
right.
can't wait.
Thanks, Ben.
You bet.
All right, later.